Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to our special transmission on the OIC's extraordinary meeting on Afghanistan. As we all know that more than 437 delegates have registered so far, and as many have arrived, and interestingly now it seems that tomorrow's moot is going to be a success. But what are the parameters of success? What exactly do we want out of it? The foreign minister earlier mentioned about the overall objectives, and he said that in order to make sure that the humanitarian crisis or the disaster which already exists in Afghanistan should not get into other countries, perhaps in the regional countries, and things should be taken care of. But now, having said that, there is an acute shortage of food, of water, clean drinking water I'm talking about, medicine, medical supplies, doctors, and you name it. On top, the economic meltdown, the banking system has collapsed, the overall crisis, they have multiplied. But the Western world is still silent. This very important meeting of OIC that is being held in Islamabad is going to pave way for the betterment of Afghanistan. Now, to talk about it, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We still have with us Professor Dr. Riffat Hussain Saab. Thank you so much, sir. And now we've been also joined in by Dr. Tughral Yamin, who's a senior analyst, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And from Paris, France, Karel, Vereycken, political analyst, is joining us. And they are from the Afghan Task Force of the Schiller Institute. Thank you so much for your time, sir. And we'll also be talking to Mr. Imtiaz Gul Saab, who's the Executive Director of CRSS, on the telephone. But let me start off from you, Professor Saab. Earlier we were talking about the overall situation that has developed in Afghanistan. Yes, the task is difficult, yet, as they say, where there's a will, there is a way. Let's talk about the will, sir. Is this moot as important as we are talking about? Will it be fruitful? And if it is going to be fruitful, what exactly do we have in our mind as far as the goals and the objectives are concerned?
Well, Faisal, thank you so much once again. Let me suggest two thoughts in response to the question that you have posed. About the political will, unfortunately, the international community, largely because of its influence of the US, and particularly I am talking about the OIC countries, they have waken up to the magnitude of the crisis a little too late. But it's never too late to begin a good thing. So what the Afghan people really need is their own money, which has been captured by the United States. Some of it has been released, but overall $9 billion which belong to the Afghan people and have been withheld. So international community should impress upon the United States that economic sanctions, as Professor Hawley was saying earlier, is a economic sanction in this day and age are a war crime. So I will not go to the extent that the Americans are committing war crimes, but Americans owe it to themselves. They owe it to their conscience to be made aware of this, that this money.
But Dr. Saab, I've spoken to so many foreigners almost in every session of my program, sir, and they believe the story or the news or the current crisis, they are not talking about it, the Western media. Whether you talk about Sweden or you talk about Germany, you talk about France, you talk about UK, you talk about the American channels, Canadian channels, nobody is talking about it, sir.
Because they don't want to talk about it, because once they begin to talk about
this is their own created mess.
Yeah, so which means that there is an ethical and moral responsibility of on the part of the United States and its allied forces to take responsibility and to take ownership of the mistakes, egregious mistake that they have committed in Afghanistan, which has pushed Afghanistan to the brink of disaster. The second important thing is that when we talk about OIC, OIC is I wouldn't call it a rich man's club, but the OIC resources, they have oil, they have gas, and they have billions of dollars,
At their disposal,
with them. So the question is that, why the leadership of the OIC is ineffective in trying to point to, even if they were to dedicate 0.5% of their GDP towards humanitarian assistance, which is meant for Afghanistan, that will make a huge difference. And so the OIC countries, including Pakistan, have a primary responsibility to own up the crisis and to come out with a strategy whereby the Afghan people can be helped in this dire need, which is universally accepted by UN World Food Programme, and Secretary General Guterres has talked about, and there have been sufficient warning, and our own Prime Minister has talked about it. The question is not the money. The question comes back to the earlier point that you raised about the political will. Will they have the political will to help their Afghan brothers and sisters who are faced with an emergency, humanitarian emergency, and humanitarian emergency can only be dealt with through a timely action. So let's hope that this OIC summit will figure a way out whereby establishing a fund for humanitarian aid, and developing a mechanism through which they can help directly the Afghan
that's a brilliant idea, not only for Afghanistan, but for all the poor Muslim countries, just in case of a disaster, whether it's an earthquake or it's a tsunami, which we have witnessed in the previous years also. So, talking about the importance of this particular moot, let's see what the Secretary General of OIC had to say about it. Let's hear him out.
Assalamu alaikum. Sir, my first question is that all the human rights agencies right now are saying that Afghanistan is facing a looming humanitarian crisis. 60% of its population is facing acute hunger, and 3.2 million Afghan children are facing the threat of acute malnutrition. What steps does OIC intend to take to avert humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan?
Thank you very much. The situation in Afghanistan featured high on the agenda of the OIC for many years. The OIC, by convening this conference, which has been called for by Kingdom of Saudi Arabia at the chair of the summit, and the generous offer from government of Pakistan to host it. I believe this conference is very important, very timely. As we all know, the situation, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is very serious. So the OIC, by convening this conference, is going to adopt a clear humanitarian strategy to deal with this humanitarian crisis in the country. OIC will develop a specific mechanism to deal also with this humanitarian situation. The conference is going to give the OIC a leading role in helping the Afghani people in order to alleviate their suffering in terms of humanitarian, medical supplies and assistance in all domains. OIC is going to mobilize all its financial institutions, going to mobilize its member states to get more resources to support the country, taking into account that the OIC has an office in Kabul, and this office will also assume great responsibility in this regard.
So my second question is that Pakistan has been playing a great role in Afghan peace process. Pakistan has been alarming the world about the humanitarian crisis and is taking the lead in providing the humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. How do you see Pakistan's role in this episode?
Pakistan played a very important role in the Islamic joint action, Islamic solidarity in general. And we believe that the fact that Pakistan offers to host this meeting is clear testimony of its commitment to this Islamic solidarity. And we believe that the government of Pakistan also will play a very important role in supporting the OIC humanitarian efforts to alleviate the suffering of the Afghani people. So we believe that the role is very important, and we'd like to call on the government of Pakistan to continue its genuine efforts to support the Afghani people based on a strong foreign policy that calls for greater regional stability and international stability.
Assalamu alaikum. Sir,
That was the Assistant Secretary General of the OIC, who was in fact talking to a media person, and he was talking about the importance and the significance of this OIC extraordinary meeting on Afghanistan. Now, Tughral, Yamin sahab, couple of points here, sir. First of all, since we are just focusing on the humanitarian issues, sir, but it is going to be somewhat like a negotiation. The Taliban team, they'll be here, the interim foreign minister is going to be here, and then the delegations, they have already arrived, sir. And it's going to be a huge summit, sir, because according to our foreign minister, earlier we were listening to him, and he said 437 delegates they have registered so far. So there are going to be meetings on the sidelines also, and plus obviously they'll be talking in the parliament, trying to tell the world what exactly is the problem like and how to sort of, engage all the resources and come up with some sort of a viable solution. Now, what could be the terms and conditions that could be set for the sake of help, sir? For example, when we talk about the Taliban, mostly the Western world is always talking about the women's rights, about their jobs and so on and so forth, sir. But currently, it's beyond that. So let's throw light on that aspect, sir. Where could they negotiate and how well can they negotiate, sir?
First of all, Faisal Saab, the Taliban are well aware of their shortcomings. I have been in meetings with their Minister of Education. In fact, yesterday or day before, we invited him to our university also, and other forums also. It was made very clear to them that unless you allow the girls to attend the university, nobody is going to help you. Not on those words, but in a manner that was palatable to them. They were told that this is one thing that the world wants from you. You cannot be a misogynist regime. And they accepted it. They said no. According to them, they said most of it is propaganda. We are not stopping anybody. No girl is being stopped from going to school or colleges. According to them, the places where girls are not going to school are places where the schools have been bombed, and even the boys are not going to school. That is what they say. But that is one thing. These are some things which the international community is wanting. An inclusive government, that means non-Pashtuns, Hazaras, Shias, everybody. It should be an inclusive government. Women folk should be there, and there should be no retribution. There have been some reports that about a few hundred former ANA members have been killed. Taliban denied that. But situation, apart from that, situation is very, very grave in Afghanistan. I also had happened to meet Ambassador Mansoor Ahmad Khan at a function a few days ago. I think it was yesterday probably. He said two things are of grave importance. One, health system, and the second is education system. He said doctors are not being paid, nurses are not being paid, and education is in a mess. The Afghans realize it, and when they visited our university, Professor Saab is also there, they understood the need for science and technology. He said we are far, far, far behind that. So there are various issues. They understand that what world wants from them, and I'm sure they're going to reconcile to it. They are not. They're not stupid people.
No, they've been exposed to the entire globe, so they understand.
They understand. They will agree to the demands that are being placed. They understand that money is not going to be forthcoming. Interestingly, they are making the first budget without foreign aid. Without foreign aid. Last time there was a deficit budget, and then they had millions of dollars in aid. This time they have no money, as you very correctly pointed out, $9.5 billion frozen. Other aids also not coming.
So roughly how much money do they need per year to look after the basics?
I have no idea. Is
it somewhere around $6 to $8 billion a year?
We asked us for a $6 billion bailout from the IMF. They are they're 1/3 of our population, even less than that's 3.
They're 38 million.
38 million. Okay, 4 million if we say. We are 220 million. So their needs
almost 5 times more.
You can say that perhaps they need $2 billion, but I'm no expert on finances. They need money. They need money not only to run their country, they need money to rebuild their country. Their country is collapsed. And even the Americans realize it. There was a forum, some retired generals, some statesmen who said that their banking system must be revived. Because how would they send money? It's not as if they can just send money to the INGOs to help them. They must channel this money with monitors, supervision to the Afghan government themselves, because they are the people who are going to run the show. Now they are saying that we are going to levy extra taxes, including Islam tax. How are the people within the country going to respond to that kind of taxation? You see, so the problems are there. They need help desperately. fantastic move by our government. They took the initiative because this is the thing that they have to do. Stability in
We've been
Afghanistan.
saying it for a very long
We have
time,
been
and we
saying-
alarmed the world that this is what is going to happen.
The world knows it. The world is just
The
licking.
world
it.
is quiet.
The
There
world-
is no morality, sir.
Fellas, no, they are licking their wounds. They have been given a bloody nose in Afghanistan. Whatever happened, due to entirely their own fault.
So are they taking the revenge in this form, sir?
They are. You see, I went to the NATO headquarters last month. Very good presentations, very good briefing, very friendly environment. But one person, perhaps he got out of the wrong side of the bed that day. He said, "You are going to suffer for what has happened in Afghanistan." Taken aback. What are you saying? We helped you. We facilitated the talks in Qatar. We were in no way doing anything which you did not like. But he said, "But you will see for yourself." We were taken aback. What is this guy saying? Later on, people said, "No, don't worry. He didn't mean it. Perhaps he was just
This is
joking."
exactly what happened.
But this was something in his mind which he spoke out. So what I'm saying is that they have. This has been, you see, Europe is thinking of its own force now in place of NATO because of the messy withdrawal from Afghanistan and for what Trump was saying earlier, that we are not going to.
I mean, Ukraine is dying to get some sort of tangible help from the Americans, and Biden is not saying yes to it.
Russia said, if you
Cross this line.
No, if you make Ukraine a member of NATO, you will suffer for it. That's what Putin is telling them. So it's not so easy for them, and they know the kind of humiliation that they have suffered.
Correct.
So it will take them some time to reconcile.
Absorb that shock.
But the point is, Afghanistan is dying, collapsing, and if it collapses,
So timely aid is what aid is all
Faisal
about.
Saab, otherwise they will head for Europe. That is a danger that the Europeans should at least understand, because Pakistan cannot.
Because
Pakistan cannot
they will
help them.
diffuse into the north. And let's see what happens.
Absolutely.
So if you allow me, sir, we've been joined in by our friend Imtiaz Gul Saab, who is Executive Director of CRSS and expert on Afghan affairs. Imtiaz Gul Saab, Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much for taking out your time and talking to us. Now, sir, looking at the current crisis in Afghanistan and the mood that is being held in Islamabad, obviously, sir, you're well aware of the participants in whatever is going on. Parameters of success. This is one question I've been asking to a lot of people. What would you say about it?
Well, I think the very fact that after a very long time, international community is getting together in Islamabad is the first step towards success. And this has, in fact, turned into an international conference, not OIC, but an international conference to consider as to what way should be charted for humanitarian and other economic assistance for Afghanistan, because the challenge, the crisis is upon our heads, and it's all, the entire process seems to be hostage to the American sanctions and the freeze on the Afghan funds that are sitting in American banks. So if the Islamabad conference is able to come up with a proposal which helps out the Afghans who are in dire straits, so a mechanism that allows to channel international humanitarian assistance, but also to pay salaries to the more than 1 million state employees and to take care of the education and health sectors. So this, if we can come up with a transitional mechanism, and if the conference can also find a way as to how to circumvent the freeze on funding and the freeze on international banking of Afghanistan, somehow, at least to facilitate the international banking as far as the businesses are concerned. So that would be, I think, a big success to start with. And obviously, a lot will depend on how the Americans look at it, because most of the major European countries and NATO members, they take cue from the United States.
Correct.
They will not like to offend the Americans through means that that may be offensive, basically, to the United States. So I think I will say let's wait for the outcome, and if all the participants have the courage to take a different course as compared to the Americans.
Gulsab, one important point, and that is obviously you talked about the NATO countries, that they have a lot of, they're under the influence of the Americans, let's put it this way. But what about the OIC member states, and in particular the Gulf countries, sir? They have the resources, they have the money, and they have got a lot of vested interests in the region as well, sir. Do you think they can take a decision on their own, or they're also looking towards the Americans, that once the approval is given or the green signal is given, only then they can, come up with some sort of a strategy of that sort?
All those countries that we have mentioned are primarily strategic partners and allies of the United States. So we should not expect any major initiative by them. However, I'm sure they will all get together to find some middle ground, some transitional mechanism to help the Afghan state as well as the people, because only humanitarian assistance cannot sustain the state of Afghanistan unless the Americans and some of their very close allies are setting up the Taliban for failure. Because if there is no international banking, if there is no real economic assistance for the state of Afghanistan, then I think in the coming months there could be social unrest, economic adversity that may also then generate a lot of pressure on the Taliban, eventually I think creating a lot of chaos and unrest. So if the United States or those countries who are embarrassed by the events since August the 15th want an end to the Taliban regime, then obviously they would just hang on to the humanitarian assistance only.
All right, thank you very much, Imtiaz Gulsab, for your comments. Now, interestingly, sir, one important figure I would like to share with the public also. I was reading an article in which it was mentioned that the money that is in circulation in Afghanistan, that is around $4 to $4.5 billion, out of which 80% is not at the moment. Perhaps the very interesting statement was there, perhaps people are hiding that money under their mattresses. So this is again something very interesting. People do understand what's going on, and there's shortage of the basic commodities, and people are uncertain, so they're not spending also. Even if people have withdrawn the money that is lying under their mattresses, means that they have it with them, but where would they spend it if there is no commodity available to do so? Now, coming to you, Mr. Karel, I'm sure you must be following this particular story, sir. We were earlier talking about the role of media, in particular in the Western world, in Europe. There is a complete blackout of this Afghan situation. There is no story being written or no report being shown on the television either. Now, this kind of a blackout, sir, what is that supposed to mean? Number one, just to keep the people unaware of the current crisis, because European people, the American people, not talking about the governments, the people in general, sir, they are good people. They would like to help. This is what they are known for, number one. And secondly, sir, even if the help arrives, what sort of challenges do you see, or the hurdles or the hindrances in its way, sir?
Well, the last article I saw was on the Daily Telegraph, saying that Afghanistan was hit by hyperinflation, and that this was all the fault of the new government, which is it's a completely sadistical comment, because as people have said before, the withholding of the 9.5 billion by the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve, it's becoming an act of war. It's a war crime. It's a policy of scorched earth. We, with the Schiller Institute, we did a demonstration in Paris in front of the Commerzbank, which is holding $431 billion also of the Afghanistan National Bank. We called up the office of Commerzbank in Germany. It's a German private bank. And they said, we don't want to comment. So they're refusing, and they're very shameful because they're very much afraid, as you said, from U.S. pressure on this issue. But I think what can come out of the conference we're hosting in Islamabad of the OIC will create the conditions where we put again the spotlight on what has to be done. From the humanitarian standpoint, we know exactly what should be done. The snow is falling, people need shelter. We defend with the Ibn Sina operation. We want to make Afghanistan an example of construction of a national medical sector. The food should be brought in. But then we have to, this situation cannot be dealt with if the Anglo-Americans are in a confrontation policy with Russia and China. Because any form of reconstruction of Afghanistan will be considered by them as an additional defeat. So therefore, I'm very much looking to what will happen not only on Sunday, but also on Monday, if there is an extended Troika meeting between the US, Russia, China, and Pakistan.
Troika plus, yeah.
To go into, to get out of the old world and to open the doors of a new world of international relations, for which the Afghanistan crisis could be hopefully the last era of the old world.
Now, that is very, very well explained. Now, sir, Mr. Karel mentioned about this additional defeat, that if the countries are going to help Afghanistan without the wish of the Americans, that is going to be, I mean, a very interesting additional defeat. They are already blaming Pakistan, the Americans I'm talking about, for their own failures in Afghanistan, and then scapegoating Pakistan for that. Now Pakistan is, in fact, they have taken the initiative, and they've invited, and so many people and so many countries, they have responded very positively. Don't you think this is going to be another additional defeat from their perspective, sir, this moot? Don't you think then, if this is the case, then why would they like to make this moot a success?
Well, you have to look at the weight of OIC vis-a-vis the forces who do not want OIC to be playing a very active role in terms of its ability to help the Afghan people. And I don't think that the Americans, there are voices from within the United States, from the US congressmen, and along with the letter that was written by the ex-ambassadors and NATO military commanders, in which they have called upon, and the letters were addressed.
Even if they had not written those letters, still, sir, Americans or the President Joe Biden knows exactly what is going on.
No, but that notwithstanding, what I am saying is that there is a survival issue of 34 million Afghan people. And if no timely help is provided to them, either by OIC or the international community, so it's going to be a huge blot on the face of the West, and there are going to be long-term consequences ensuing from this failure to help them, to help Afghanistan its most dire moment. So that is something that the West is also aware of this. But in terms of the geopolitics, of course, the Americans do not see eye to eye with either Russia or with China, even though there is a extended Troika meeting that may follow the OIC moot. But the question is that, is it a question of political will? Is it a question of resources? Or is it a question of figuring a way out whereby the geopolitics can be kept aside and Afghan people can be helped by the international community? And that is the real challenge. How do you navigate these two approaches, which is the geopolitics, and the Taliban regime is being sidelined, and even in this OIC summit, it will be very interesting to see that at what level the Afghan government would be represented, or at what level they are going to integrate them into the OIC meeting. So that's a huge challenge for Pakistan. But I hope that resources is not the issue. The question is that the American willingness to release the funds that they have impounded, which belongs to the Afghan government. Even the Americans were not to release that money. They know that they are sitting on a wasted asset, because as Tughral Sahab has rightly pointed out, the Afghan government has gone ahead and they have prepared their own budget without any kind of foreign assistance that has been denied to them right now. So once the OIC wakes up to this reality of limited American influence to affect their decisions relating to the provision of humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, I think that's going to be a clear indication in my mind. You earlier talked about the parameters of success, but one success would be to break out of this narrow geopolitics of the past, which has
Dr. Sahab, isn't it too much to ask for?
Well, if the Afghan government can prepare its own budget without being 75% of the country, which was prior to the August 15 was totally aid dependent, then the sky is the limit. But the question is that should there be a mechanism whereby the Afghan government, as you mentioned, the Afghan people, they are stacking money, they are hiding money and they are not using it, but they are not using it partly because of there is a lack of trust.
Uncertainty, sir.
Uncertainty and lack of trust between the Taliban and the Afghan people.
Do you think people in Afghanistan, Tughral Sahab, still believe, and because at the end of the day, people living in the villages, that's a different concept. People who matter the most are in the cities, because the decision making process is done there and they're being heard also. So people living in the cities, do you think they have this kind of an uncertainty that this current regime might not work, and there is going to be an alternative or something of that sort? I mean, perhaps in the beginning it could be in the form of an exclusive or inclusive government, and that inclusive government means that people from Hazara, people from the Tajik, which are 25%, Uzbeks are 10%, then you have Pashtun around 55% if I'm not wrong. So there should be some representation accordingly.
Faisal Sahab, let me put this question to you. If you feel that you are not going to get your paycheck next month, or if I know I am not going to get my pension or pay next month, would I be trusting the government? I won't be. So those kind of uncertainties are there. When the government is not able to protect the life and limb of the citizens, they are not able to provide them food, security, etc., then people are very skeptical about your ability to govern. There have been demonstrations by women. Yesterday also they said that you can't stop us from working, you can't stop us from doing things that we have been doing. So these people have been exposed. They know.
So imagine Taliban protecting the women, when they were out on the roads and they were protesting. Right. I mean, that was a very weird sight to see.
So they have to come to some kind of agreement amongst each other. Taliban cannot be what Taliban 1.0 but the Taliban 2.0 have to be different if they want to have the sympathies of their government, of the people. Yes. If they fail there, then they're gone. So I think they are also walking a very, very tight rope. Now, the money that you asked about Afghanistan, kind of money that Afghanistan needs, I was just reading a New York Times report of 2 September. They said that Afghanistan needs $11 billion
a year
for their public expenditures. That was being provided to them by donors previously.
Donor agencies.
Yeah, $11 billion. So, but now there's an informal economy, as you said, that people are hiding their money, and it's Hawala and Hundi people who are acting as unofficial banking system. So, and another thing about
the flight of capital has taken place at this level.
First of all, the Ashraf Ghani, that fellow ran away with bags full of dollars.
Left a few bags because of the helicopter never had the capacity to lift.
About the Americans, the common man, American people are nice people. I have no doubt about that. And they understand the humanitarian situation. There was a delegation of 4 senators, and that also indicated that Americans are willing to
Keep
do
Pakistan in the loop.
Pakistan in the loop, or go through Pakistan and help the Afghans out. There are P5 attending, representatives of P5 attending this conference. So they are not being left out of the loop. They've been brought in, so they should see what kind of sentiment exists, because they will be exposed to the Afghan Taliban leadership. Amir Muhammad Muttaqi is going to be there, and other people. So they are attending this mood. Pakistan has done a very good job. I will commend the government again and again and again for this initiative. This is for our betterment, because problems in Afghanistan means problems for Pakistan. We cannot cope with any more problems in Afghanistan. So Americans are not out. They will not be out. There will be anger at the highest level. They will not make that proverbial telephone call that we are trying to expect from them. But down below, they will try to help. That's what I look at. And in this summit, also, they will come to know what is the requirements of Afghanistan and why Pakistan is so keen to help them out. So,
as long as they do, sir, that is what the way forward should be like.
Yeah.
But let's go to Mr. Harley now. Mr. Ali, you earlier mentioned about very important points. You did talk about the blackout of this story in the media and so on and so forth. Now, so whenever you talk to an average person out there, like who is not somebody from, who's not a political scientist, let's put it this way, who's an average European, I mean, how much awareness do they have about Afghanistan? What Afghanistan went through during the last 40 years, not 20, 40 years, post 1979, Soviet invasion. If you remember, again, a similar conference was held in which every single country supported Afghanistan because they were invaded by the Soviets. The Americans on one side. But currently, sir, it's the other way around. Now we are talking about the Soviets asking for help, and the Americans, they are in the other bracket. How do you see this equation now?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay. Well, of course, in France, for example, there was a very much awareness of Afghanistan in the times of Commander Massoud, who has been somehow promoted at that time by France as a somehow slightly different options, as you said, under Soviet occupation. Today, the news we get from Afghanistan mainly comes from Doctors Without Borders, which is originally a French NGO, which are doing an excellent job in Afghanistan. And they were asked by the Taliban actually to take over the health system and to run it. And they had to refuse it because they don't have the capacity to do so. They don't have the legal status. I mean, they're just an NGO. They cannot be a substitute of the government.
Correct.
But it shows, I mean, there is a big, most people in the French NGOs, they're all in favor of releasing the funds. And I think the conference of tomorrow maybe can create the conditions where maybe not the US immediately, but at least the Bank for International Settlements, the German Central Bank and Commerzbank maybe will be tolerated that they release their part, which is a very small part of the assets of the Afghan National Bank. The other point I want to make is that one message which the OIC could convey to the United States is that if they would be serious about fighting international terrorism, they should rebuild Afghanistan. Because the Taliban, they were in armed struggle for 20 years. And they decided now to leave armed struggle and to build a country. So in terms of soft power and prestige, if the US and the West would really be serious about de-radicalization of Islamic fundamentalism, they should really help Afghanistan and Pakistan and the whole region to rebuild as an example of how we can fight really terrorism, which is through mutual development. It's not by sending drones and killing some people here and there. That doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We need international mutual win-win cooperation, and we cannot condemn the Taliban for what they are. We should only look to what they do in reality and not what they were in the past, because it's the future which has to determine the present, not the past.
Now, last quick comments. I think hope is a good factor, sir. Hopeful, somebody who's hopeful, I mean, he's very positive. But reality versus expectations. We did talk about that, okay, if this happens, this might happen. But, sir, we're talking about the Western world being on one side, but as mentioned by our friend, Mr. Karel, he says that a lot of NGOs, they still want to support the Afghan people. Like he mentioned about the Doctors Beyond Borders. And I still remember that story, sir, in Kunduz when a hospital of these people were bombed by the American C-130. Imagine, and so many people got killed. So morality doesn't exist. When it can, they will say, well, that was a friendly fire or something of that sort, and they'll move on. But sir, currently, whatever is happening, sir, we do understand that this is no more a unipolar world. I won't even call it a bipolar, but a multipolar world as such. Russia on one side. Now they're also talking about business. Wherever the Americans were, they put their foot down as well. And the Chinese, the kind of statements the Chinese now issue, sir, from their foreign office, you must have noticed one thing, that the language is different, and they have a very aggressive posture now. So things have changed, that is what it seems like. So without the help of the Americans, let's suppose the Americans say, well, because we felt so betrayed or whatever, XYZ factors were there, that we don't want to help. We were never there to rebuild. Remember, that was a statement given by Mr. Joe Biden. So if that is the case, sir, do you think the non-American allies or the countries in the other group, or the Asian countries in particular, can look after these affairs? At the end of the day, it's a matter of $11 billion a year, sir. Like the way the Chinese, in fact, talked about Iran, and they said 400 billion in the next 25 years. So they have the capacity. Don't you think so? The Chinese and the Russians, perhaps a couple of other regional countries, can sort out this issue, sir, without even looking towards the West. Quick comment, sir, because we'll be running out of time.
Well, Faisal, it's an empirical question. As I mentioned earlier, and I would like to go back to that point, that the resource constraint is not an issue for the international community. The real issue is their ability or their willingness to use whatever money that Afghanistan needs to fight this battle for survival. And this is only meant not only to save the regime in the Taliban regime, and there can be many permutations of this regime, whether this regime has a good or a bad human record. But keeping the geopolitics out of this, the question really is that can't the 57 OIC countries, along with the Americans, along with the Chinese, can be brought to a one-point agenda where the survival of the Afghan people and the looming catastrophe that they face can be avoided. It's a perfectly preventable catastrophe, even though some of you, because I noticed that you had said that it's too late. It's never too late to do good work.
Sir.
Yes, I would take on from where Professor Riffat Hussain Saab left. It's never too late to give up on good work, and it's never too late to give up on hope. Chinese have deep pockets, Arabs have deep pockets, very, very deep pockets. Afghanistan needs will to survive. 50 years ago, Bangladesh emerged as a basket case in this world. Now they're forged ahead of us. If the Afghans have the will, if they get the money, they have the capacity to forge ahead.
Absolutely, sir. Hardworking, tough people.
Tough people, and they have a long history behind them. So I think the situation is not hopeless. I think with Pakistan's help, with Iran's help, with China's help, with the OIC's help, 57 members of the OIC, some of them very, very, very rich. We can help Afghanistan.
I mean,
and Afghans
look
can
at the
help
kind of
themselves.
funds Qatar and Kuwait have. I mean, it's unbelievable.
And
But anyway,
$23 billion the Qataris are willing to give for buying weapons from the US. So
that is the interesting part. And they don't need that as such.
They don't need
But anyway, thank you so much, Tughral Saab. Professor Saab, it was a pleasure having you, sir.
Thank you,
And
sir.
thank you so much, Mr. Carr, for your presence as well in our show. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. And that's all we have for this hour. And after this, you'll be having a 1 hour news bulletin. And after that, the transmission is going to continue today and also tomorrow. Stay tuned. Khuda Hafiz.